Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is David Robinson. I am the LSA's Director of Membership and Meetings, and we're going to wait just a few moments to allow the rest of our attendees to join us, and then we'll get started. So sit tight, and we'll get going in just a few minutes. Thanks. Hey, everybody. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, thank you, everybody, for joining us. My name is David Robinson. I'm the Director of Membership and Meetings for the Linguistics Society of America, which is the sponsor of this webinar. I'm he, him, his. While I'm talking, you'll be seeing a brief slideshow about the LSA and what we do. And on the last slide, you'll see some information about a special membership discount for participants in this webinar. Before I turn the floor over to our panelists, I'd like to take a few moments to let you know how the webinar will work and to make sure you're familiar with the control panel. So you will see a handouts widget on your control panel. We have there a copy of the panelists' slideshow that you can download at any time during the webinar. Note that there were some technical issues with one of the slideshows, so we'll be sending around a revised version of that afterwards. And again, if you forget to download it, don't worry, we'll have copies available after the webinar is uploaded to our YouTube page. You also may have noticed that your microphones are muted. That's because we don't want miscellaneous background noise from about 100 participants. So when it comes time for the question and answer part of the webinar, you'll see that there is a questions widget that you can use to ask your questions. And if your question is for a specific panelist, please let us know which panelist you'd like to answer it. Finally, we'd like to take a couple of short polls just so that our panelists have a better sense of who you are. There are two very short polls with just one question apiece. I'm going to run those, and we'll go ahead and ask you to answer them, and then everybody can see the results. So the first one just asks about whether you're an undergraduate student, a graduate student, or a professional linguist. And I'm just starting that poll now. So we'll take just a few more seconds to allow people to vote. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close this poll, and then I will share the response. So everybody should be able to see the results now. 16% undergraduates, 52% graduate students, and 31% professional linguists. So now I'm going to run the second poll. Here. Here we go. Second poll, this asks about your employment status, and here we go. Okay, we'll just take a few more seconds to collect the votes. Go ahead and close this one, and I will share the responses with you. So now everybody should be able to see this. 44% of you are in academia, 14% in industry, 10% self-employed, and 32% unemployed. So great. So I think that concludes my part of the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Christopher Stewart. He's a member of the LSA's Special Interest Group on Linguistics Beyond Academia, and he is also the organizer of this webinar. So Chris, take it away, and I will get the slideshow running momentarily.
Can everyone hear me? I don't know how I would know that. David, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, David, for that introduction. As he mentioned, this webinar is organized by the LSA's Linguistics Beyond Academia Special Interest Group, which does a number of sorts of events. I've included a link there to the page that you can visit to get more information about our SIG, as we call it. So we did last year, we did a webinar called something along the lines of non-computational linguistics, linguist work in tech 2. If you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to check that out. I think it's kind of a good precursor to this webinar. This webinar is focused more on the how do I do it. So we have a number of panelists of linguists and computer scientists that are working on different linguistics related applications in industry, different settings at different points in their career, doing all sorts of different things. So this is more the how do I do it webinar. Maybe you were interested in the first webinar and you're wondering, well, what do I need to get there? And that's the goal of this webinar. As you listen to the presentations, we would encourage you to think critically about what you would need to do to embark on such a career, so a successful career in tech as a linguist. And yeah, we look forward to your questions at the end, and I will turn the microphone over to Nancy Chang.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, and I think I'm supposed to get control of the screen as well. Is that right?
And that's okay. You should have that now.
Yep. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
I can see it. Okay,
it's not being interfered by. Okay, it's good. Okay, so I'm just knowing that. Okay, so thanks to everyone out there in interweb space. My name is Nancy Chang. I'm very happy to be part of this really interesting panel. I work at Google. I'm a research scientist. I work on the assistant, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Definitely eager to know what your questions are. So my first big disclaimer I should make, I am not a real linguist. And when I say real, I mean none of my training, officially none of my degrees were actually in linguistics. You can see all the bold faces to show that, yeah, I'm actually sort of had a path that was always sort of officially on the tech side. Nonetheless, I will say that through all this, and like I said computer science, but you can maybe see that all throughout the special interest areas I always had were around language. So I would say that this kind of my interests are actually, how does language work? How do people use language, learn language? What is the structure of language? I definitely can pass as a linguist. In Google, people often assume that I'm a linguist, which is it's interesting to discern whether this is a compliment or not, to be honest. So let's see, so that's my sort of official background has been actually more on the cognitive modeling and AI sort of applications, but really trying to understand how language works. And when I say that, my area within linguistics, I would say syntax, semantics, pragmatics. I came from Berkeley, so may not be surprising that I have sort of a frame semantics, construction grammar kind of linguistic background. So I'll tell you more about that in a second. This is sort of the official career path. I thought it might be interesting to others. Despite the long gap in time from when I went through the process that you're going through now, it might be interesting to know the backstory. Because again, looking at my background, you might be able to tell, I actually was always headed toward a career in academia. I've always been interested in research and sort of what are the design questions, what are the interdisciplinary issues here. As I say, actually being interested in language, cognition, and computation used to be really weird and marked me out as not quite fitting into anything. I think these days many people have these as sort of the different. This is not as unusual. So okay, here's the backstory. The backstory is I was doing. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Okay, so the backstory is I was doing happily doing my research in the halls of Berkeley, and in particular, International Computer Science Institute is a research institute associated with the university, and I knew many people who worked at Google. So over the years, and I am not kidding, because actually one of my undergraduate friends was one of the early Google engineers. So I would get all these, hey, you should come, because a long parade of colleagues, office mates, housemates, everyone was sort of ending up there gradually. But of course I asked them, because as I said before, my interest was in language. Every time I asked, are you working on language? Basically I'd get some variant of, oh, no. Actually, they said, the good part is they would say, oh, language, that's way too hard. We're just a search company. We're doing information retrieval. No, not language. So it wasn't particularly, didn't seem like a good fit for me. When I finally graduated, I asked again, I was like, okay, well, just at least talk to them. It doesn't help. And I would say, hey, they said, the recruiter asked what you're interested in. I said, oh, I'm interested in semantics. I don't need to be doing pure research, but I'm very happy to do something applied, but is anyone working on semantics? There was a long pause. And I swear to God, there were like dust, like the little, like I could feel like the tumbleweeds blowing and semantics. There was no indication that was sort of a typical thing that people worked on. Now, of course, Google was already doing parsing, machine translation, all sorts of text processing, as probably you all know, but semantics was definitely not of interest, not well aligned at the time. So I basically ran away to Europe, continued my academic path, which honestly I was more committed to and interested in anyway, had some fun applying some of the more theoretical work I'd done before in how children learn language, for example, by applying it to sort of robotics and sort of developmental context. Ran away to Europe, it's like classic story. But at a certain point, one has to look for a real job. And after doing a sort of various kinds of postdocs and visiting positions, a recruiter contacted me. And so long story short, I ended up ensconced in this multicolored world, drinking the Kool-Aid of various kinds. And I should say the reason why I think it was a better fit in 2012 than in 2008 is by then, basically, thanks to some of the other colleagues on the line, I think everyone in the world was excited about conversational search, right? Siri was out. Everyone was playing catch up. My impression was they finally were like, oh, wait, language, that's a thing we should work on. And so the word semantics, which had not been known at all, became like, actually the topic that many teams were working on. So I joined and I worked on these earliest sort of, like call mom and like take me to the airport. Later on, as this sort of part of Google grew, research and machine intelligence, I actually switched over to the research side. So in case people are interested, there really are opportunities to do things more on the research side versus more on the production side. I've done really both because I switched over to that side. And then in 2016, I switched back to production. So 2016 around then was, as again, most people probably know, the Google Assistant became, sort of one of the major pushes that we wanted to be able to support conversational search. So that's kind of the backstory. And I would say, the way that the word semantics became a sort of, what is that, to, oh, everyone's working on it. I think that's been happening with pragmatics as well. They might not say the term as much, but it's definitely, once you're in conversation and context, the questions coming up, fortunately, are naturally pushing to those parts of the linguistics, sort of like, those different specialties. Okay, so I think I don't need to spend much time, but just to give you an idea, this is the product we work on. I think most people are familiar, but the Google Assistant, like many other companies, it is Google's attempt to let conversation drive how people get things done, essentially. That means examples, these simple examples that have a little bit of multi-turn, people asking who won a particular competition, who their plus player is. You see it relies both on being able to understand what the question is, but also what is the data behind it that we have that we can look up the answers to these kind of things. And this is a very traditional structure. Those of you who don't have experience with sort of the computational linguistic sides of things, this is a very standard system architecture that people are working on the speech side. You process it, you process the input. The NLU box is the one that I work on, and the teams that I work with mostly worry about. But actually, over time, these other boxes, the connections between them are growing. So I would say, actually, this whole process of NLU, there are linguists involved in every one of these steps at Google. So it's nice to know there's like the computational linguistic systems. The word computational is not just a kind of asterisk or hedge in the way that it used to be. I think these days we actually have a good amount between. Okay, so let's see. One other thing I will mention is that because people are much more interested now in going beyond, let me answer questions that we have trivia facts stored for in a database, but actually having Google do things on your behalf. That is why the sort of the word user intent or intent action, people doing things for you, is now central. And it was a very great delight to me after the whole history that you heard about, that at the big Google Public Developer Conference last year, this was a slide that a PM I work with showed to show that, hey, we want to be able to let people say to Google naturally that they want to do things like, in this case, find calm or do meditation or de-stress. And when she said, to this public audience, language is hard, I work with a team of expert linguists to define intents, to capture these natural variations. That was great. Those of us in the room who work on this team were like, yay, they finally mentioned linguists in a public context. I think it was acknowledgement that the kinds of work we do, which involves, analyzing semantic structure. And I'll just flash here again, this is a slide that was shown to everyone, to engineers, to developers. You might get a sense here if you have like semantics, pragmatic background, particularly frame semantics might be a relevant reference here, that actually the kinds of things that we have to start being able to sort of like model, understand, collect data for, understand how, like sort of bring into a scalable, computationally friendly form. This is very much in line with a lot of work that I hope you may be familiar with from your training. Okay, so moving on to the sort of, here's my little bit of advice, and I would say caveat emptor, because my background may be different from yours, and of course the timeline and sort of circumstances are quite different. I think when people ask me, well, how do I prepare? Like it's obvious that having a linguistics background should help you. I'm a little bit biased toward syntax, semantics, pragmatics, because I think increasingly, very suddenly it became that conversational assistance mattered. Instead of trying to get the high recall on queries and like ignore all the stop words, which is like stopping the stop words mentality is one of my goals. I think people understand that now we actually have to read between the lines, understand context, that kind of thing. Of course, understanding data, all the things you should consider yourselves the experts on data. And I think there's a wide variety of how much you go down the path toward being more like a software engineer, more like a data scientist or machine learning person. But all those things are useful depending on your background. I'll mention, because they asked, what are the skills that are maybe surprising? just as I would say, you are entering in tech a sort of multicultural, multilinguistic community of people who don't understand each other very often. And so I would say actually one of the soft skills is being able to understand that people don't mean what you thought they meant, and being able to explain complex concepts in terms that other people can understand. And then I kind of want to be aware of time here, so I'll just say that I think it is way, way better out there than it used to be for people coming into the field, which is great. And it's changing all the time. So the main thing I would say here is you have to understand like what kind of thing you would enjoy. Do you want to do something that's more like, oh, you get satisfaction out of launching all the time and seeing your work out in the world? Or do you want to work on longer term things which might be harder to show direct impact for, but maybe more meaningful in the long term? I would definitely, just as if you would ask me, should I go to grad school? I would say the same thing. You should find out about the advisors. Similarly, you should find about the teams and find about people who have worked there, because I think it's very variable across companies and within companies, even across teams and projects. So I think I'll wrap up there, just a few links, and thank you very much.
I guess it's my turn.
Yep, it is.
Okay. Hi, everybody. That was great, Nancy. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me, and thank you, everybody, for coming to listen to us. I hope it's useful for you. So I have two disclaimers as well. Well, my name is Jose Montero. I'm a computational linguist at Apple. I work in the Siri team, the voice assistant. I work in the Spanish voices. I started doing that. I'm doing other things now too. And my two disclaimers are that I'm not, I wasn't born in the US. So I might have a little bit of a different background than most people that are attending the webinar, but I hope it's useful anyway. And the second one is that I'm not going to talk about what I do, in my day-to-day too much because of confidentiality reasons. It's hard to know where the line is, so I'm just gonna keep it short on that end. But I'll talk to how I got there, and that might be useful for some of you. So yeah, my education is, I started in Granada, where I'm from, very beautiful city in the south of Spain. And I studied Spanish language and literature. At that point, that's what I wanted to do because I just really liked reading, and it seemed like a great way to spend my time just reading more and learning about all these things. There was also some language training on that. Like my first contact with linguistics was there. After I finished, I realized that probably a better career path would be to focus more on the linguistics side. I wasn't sure I wanted to be let's say, a researcher in academia for literature. So I switched to linguistics. I did my master's degree in Mexico. That was interesting in many ways, but the main two ways were that I was more exposed to linguistics per se, theoretical linguistics, things like semantics, syntax, morphology, phonetics, which I hadn't touched very much before that. The second reason was that I was exposed to a different variety of Spanish, a different dialect, if you want to call it that way. And that was really interesting for me to just kind of as a way to understand my language better and see how it can be like different but the same. It was really, really interesting. So when I finished that, I started teaching. That would be the next slide, David. Yeah, and I was teaching for more than 7 years. I was mostly a Spanish teacher, teaching Spanish to non-native speakers. So I taught in Spain, I taught in Mexico, to people that were visiting the country and wanted to learn Spanish. I taught to teenagers and adults in schools and private lessons. And then I moved to the US for personal reasons about 4 years now, 4 years ago. And about that time, I discovered online education, and I started teaching online classes. And that was one of the biggest milestones of my teaching career, because I just realized how broad you can go by using the internet, how much more people you can reach with your work. And that was pretty amazing. And I was also in contact with a lot of more people as students, so that you know give me a lot of variety of people to talk to and communicate with. And then when I moved to San Francisco, that was another kind of milestone, because a lot of people in San Francisco work in tech. So I started teaching in person again, and a lot of my students were just tech workers. And I kind of found it very interesting what they were doing, and like I felt like I always wanted to know more about what they were doing. I was kind of using my classes to learn more about their work, and I was asking them in Spanish what they did and all that kind of stuff. So that was those two things were very important for me to realize, this kind of other options that I had that I could possibly have. So in the next slide, that was kind of the starting of my exposure to tech. In the places that I was living before San Francisco, tech wasn't really a very common career for people to go into. And I would say even computational linguistics wasn't like a really big thing. I don't think I had any option for computational linguistic classes in any of my my programs that I did before here. But anyway, I went to San Francisco. The tech scene is really big there, and I started to being more interested in that. So I kind of just started teaching myself some things and wanted to learn more. So the first things that I started doing were listening to podcasts, because that's a really easy way to kind of understand how people talk about these kind of things. So these are two that I liked. Programming Therein was the first one. Data Frame is a very good one. It's from DataCamp, and they talk about data science, which is very applicable to what I do now with language. My first computer science course was edX CS50, which is a great introduction to computer science. I recommend it to everybody if you haven't done any computer science before, like I didn't. It was great to kind of learn the basics. And then I did some online classes at the City College of San Francisco for more specific things like Python and SQL and Unix programming and that kind of thing. So fast forward to now, that will be the next slide. I got my first tech job. It's been less than a year. It's been like 9 months or so. So I'm a computational linguist at Apple. I work primarily with phonetics. We deal with the quality of the voices. And the way I got there was kind of, I was contacted by the staffing company that hired me. And I just posted that I was looking for a job in many job listing sites, and this one dies. My recruiter saw it and just called me, and then that's how it started. So I recommend doing that to everybody. Just publicize your profile in every way you can. Interview a lot, because that's very useful, not only for just getting the job, but also to get in practice. I did a lot of interviews that I kind of knew I didn't want to do, but they were a very good practice to like the real actual interview that I wanted to get the job for. And then negotiate with your recruiter, because the happier you are when you start your position, the more fulfilled you're going to feel, and the more you're going to provide to the company that you're working for. And I think that's pretty much, what's happening now. What's coming for the future? I really want to keep learning. That's one of the main reasons why I'm doing this, because I just love learning, and I just like, finding out new things and finding out how things work. So that's going to be there for sure. And I recommend it to everybody also. I think it's very important to leverage your strengths, whatever they are. For example, for me, I'm a very organized person, so I've noticed that people at my team sometimes, there's need of work in like how we organize the tasks and everything. So it's kind of a project management kind of work. So I'm helping out with that, things like that. For example, I'm not the best programmer, so that's not my strength right now. So I kind of leverage the things that I do know how to do. And the other one is, try to meet people, try to talk to anybody that works in whatever industry you want to go to or whatever products you like. There are great tools to do that, LinkedIn and many others. But yeah, networking, it's very important. And I think my time is coming to an end. The next slide is just my contact information and my dog. Just to wish you a very happy Friday. And yeah, I look forward to hearing your questions at the end, and I hope that was useful. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Justin Rill. My pronouns are he, him. And I've been working as a linguist at Facebook for about 8 months now, since October. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so a little bit of background on me. I did a PhD in syntax and typology at the University of Delaware. And then, like Nancy and probably a lot of other people, I tried first looking for jobs in academia, but that didn't work out. And then I pivoted. I got lucky and then got my foot in the door in tech. And then I found myself at Facebook. And I guess what I was going to talk about was what I've gleaned in my time in tech in terms of the skills, and I had broken down into 2 categories, skills and personality, right, that are needed, in my opinion, in order to work as a linguist in tech. So yeah, I'll just go over them quickly now. So in terms of skills, I had it broken down in terms of analytical thinker, having some tech savvy, keyword is some, having good judgment, and being a good communicator. A lot of this has been touched on already, so it's good that we're in agreement about a lot of these things. And then in terms of personality, I identified resilience and finding the right fit. So I'll elaborate on all that stuff in a moment. Next slide, please. So in terms of being an analytical thinker, I think that this is the slide or the bullet points that will be most obvious to someone with traditional linguistic training in academia, right? This is like the skill set that we traditionally develop in academia, right? So being able to evaluate the pros and cons of a proposal, that'll translate into tech, because sometimes you just get a group of people together and you have to talk about the right way to approach a problem. And linguists, we think really highly of ourselves, obviously. But yeah, that's one of the things that we do, regardless of whether it's a strictly linguistic proposal or any kind of proposal, is just thinking analytically through the pros and cons of a proposal. I would say, I should add also that Nancy talked about this a little bit, but my perspective, where I'm coming from, is working as an NLU linguist, and then more on the production side of things. So less research, more production, more just putting your nose down to the grindstone and getting it done and pushing out a product. Yeah, with that in mind, having a keen eye for consistency and precedent, these are things that come naturally to linguists, right? But I think that that's very transferable too, because sometimes you inherit a huge system, or when you onboard, you step into a system that's existing, right? You're not building something from scratch, and you want to think about, okay, how do we do things previously? What is this kind of utterance similar to? What is this kind of construction similar to? Stuff like that. But then at the same time, you have to think about exceptions, right? Because we all know that language is all about patterns and then exceptions to those patterns. So yeah, I think that this is something that linguists have a natural predisposition for. You want to have a keen eye for ambiguity. Linguists love ambiguity. Sometimes you're the only one in the room. If you're the only linguist in the room, you're the only one who's going to think about ambiguity. So yeah, I don't think I need to elaborate on that. And then last thing I wanted to add is that in my experience, I find that there's not that much academic or theoretical linguistic background that's needed. Maybe it's different from someone who's working more on the research end, but on the production end, I would say that you don't need that much academic or theoretical linguistic background, or I should say I haven't found myself using it that much in my day-to-day. Of course, it helped and informed me as a person and a thinker, right? But yeah, that's kind of my take on that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so some tech savvy. I think coming in with some computer science background is great. If you've got it, that's phenomenal. If you had to only study one language, I would say Python is your one-stop shopping. That's what I did. Yeah, I too am not that great a coder. I have some coding chops, but I'm definitely not that good at it. But I would say that that's what you would need is Python. And so to elaborate on that, I think that if you're working in the tech world, your job is not necessarily to be coding, although it could be, but it's definitely going to be interacting with backend systems, knowing how to read other people's code, knowing how linguist work fits together with other people's work, who might be software engineers, who might be product managers, who might be data scientists. So that's what I mean by some tech savvy. You don't have to be an ace coder, although that's great, but you do have to have some tech savvy to know how to just like fit into that system and understand it. And yeah, I think that you could potentially come in with very little computer science background and still succeed. But also you should be prepared to learn new stuff quickly on the job. And that probably applies to any job. But I'm thinking of stuff like regex, regular expressions, where if you don't know that kind of stuff before going into tech, you're probably gonna have to learn that really quickly. Not that it's super hard or anything, but you're just gonna have to learn it really quickly. SQL is another example. That's kind of like a pseudo language, I guess. And yeah, I didn't know that before starting this job, but I learned it very quickly, and I think that was super helpful. And I think that that's something that new linguists working in tech would want to do. Next slide, please. Okay, should have good judgment. I think that linguists want to think about what's common and what's natural and what's likely in terms of utterances and words and speech patterns. So unlike maybe in the academic world, you don't want to necessarily get lost trying to cover edge cases, which are academic interest only. You often, again, speaking from the production side of things, you often have to make compromise in terms of what you can cover in the first iteration of a release or product. So you kind of want to have good judgment in terms of like what's common and natural and stuff like that. However, very, very important caveat, it's also, I see it as a linguist's responsibility to make sure that all groups are represented and that you're an advocate for inclusion. This is something that linguists are naturally attuned to, right? But I'm thinking about stuff like non-standard dialects, marginalized groups. There's all kinds of socio-linguistic factors at play here. And I think it's also a linguist's role to kind of inject that perspective into the projects that you're working on. Because sometimes you're the only one who even knows about those issues, possibly. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, and so Nancy touched on this, and I think this is definitely true. So good communicator. Your job is often to weigh in and provide advice about linguistic issues to non-linguists. And this is not their fault because software engineers, their job is not necessarily to have ling background, right? But you might have to explain to them a linguistic issue, why a proposal is not going to work, why a proposal is unrealistic, why this is trickier than they might expect, something like that. So that I think is really important. Yeah, and so it is often linguists' responsibility to contextualize for other stakeholders that language is messy and difficult and all that. Next slide, please. Okay, and so now we're on the personality side of things. I use that term loosely, but I thought of the resilience, meaning that, at least in my experience, this is a faster moving environment than academia. So stuff, at least in my experience, is constantly changing on you. New tools are coming out. Sometimes tools go down, and you just got to be able to roll with the punches. I think that's a very good skill to either have or develop. And yeah, you have to be comfortable with frustration because, especially when you're working on the product side and you have deadlines and you got to get stuff done, those kind of things can be challenging sometimes. You want to be comfortable with frustration, comfortable with being uncomfortable. In particular, I thought of learning to dig, meaning if you work for a huge tech company like Facebook, Apple, Google, they usually have huge systems, right? And then you're just stepping into this and you might be a little bit lost at first, but you just want to develop, you want to get really good at learning how to dig, which is when you have a question, usually the answer is out there, but you just got to know how to find it, hopefully by yourself. You just got to know where to search for documentation and files and stuff like that. And so that's a good skill to develop once you're there. Okay, next slide, please. And then, okay, so this is my last slide. I think it's important to find the right fit. So yeah, other panelists have already touched on this, but I was speaking from my perspective so far working in industry, but there are a whole lot of different companies and roles out there, right? And so see, these are kind of some of the spectrums that I was thinking of. There's some top-down companies, there's some bottom-up companies in terms of where the ideas come from. There's startups, which linguists can work at, especially nowadays, like Nancy was saying, this is a really good time to be a linguist in industry. So in a startup, you wear a bunch of different hats, but in an established company, roles are more to find. Some places value cooperation, some places value argumentation. Some places encourage you to do research and publish. Some are more product driven. Some places are very protective of their IP. And then, yeah, some places feature linguists prominently, like on their own dedicated team, and you have linguist titles and all that stuff. And then other companies, that's not the case, right? They have like embedded linguists on different non-linguist dedicated teams. You might not even have a linguist title. So, you know, that's another thing to keep in mind, that how the company sees linguists varies from company to company. So yeah, I'm happy to elaborate on any of these points in the Q&A later. That's all I had prepared for now.
Hi, everyone. I imagine everybody can hear me. So I'm a computational linguist and I work for Apple. And I have my LinkedIn information right there, so just feel free to kind of grab it and you know, feel free to message me if you ever want any more information about the industry and what it is, what it's like to work in the tech background, in the tech field. So a little bit about my background. I used to work as a translator and interpreter for a school district, for a large school district, and that really has helped me a lot now that I'm working in localization projects as a computational linguist. So I was actually, I was working on my graduate degree at Cal State Fullerton. I have my degree in applied linguistics, but my BA was actually in communicative disorders, and I had my minor in linguistics. And working in communicative disorders, I got to learn a lot about phonology. And I've been able to take that into, I took that into my graduate degree, and I kind of focused a little bit more on that. And as working as a translator, I got to work with large amounts of data and how to kind of organize it and extract it and kind of focus my efforts on that area, even though, and I really enjoyed working with people and interpreting and engaging with people and learning more about the communities that I was helping. I was always kind of hoping that I'd get the chance to work in the tech industry. That was always kind of like my goal. I was more focused on, you know, being a linguist beyond academia. I would always go to all of the webinars and the panels that I would find out, because that's where my career goals were at. So as I was working as a translator, I started to kind of apply here and there in the tech industry, and I was actually really lucky that I was contacted to work for as a computational linguist for Apple. And I'm working for the localization department here, and I focus on Siri for the US and Latin American markets, with a focus on Siri US Spanish. So my background in translation has helped me a lot to really know how users' dialects are changing, what's important to users, what the kids are listening to nowadays, what movies are out there, because all of that information is something that I have to kind of organize in our lexicons. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to tell you guys just a little bit, just briefly, about what I do. So earlier, Nancy was talking about the conversational experience, and she mentioned that there's linguists that work on kind of every area of those boxes that she showed in her really great model. So I focus primarily on two areas, the ASR area and the TTS area. So these are what are called front-end areas. And in the ASR area, that's automatic speech recognition. That's the area that's kind of picking up all of that acoustic data. The acoustic model is picking up those phonetic sequences, and then the language model is then working on, you know, getting the meaning from that data. And on the TTS side, that's text to speech, I work on making sure that, Siri sounds good, that she's pronouncing words correctly as in the dialect, in the locale that I'm working on, which is primarily Spanish for the US or Spanish for Latin America. So I work on those two areas. And coming into this job, I can tell you that it was really intimidating. I was working as a translator. I had almost no knowledge of the tech industry. So even the lingo in technology, when I came in, I did not understand it. And I think earlier Jose mentioned how listening to podcasts is really important, at least to just get familiar with how people speak here, because it can get really confusing doing one jump to the next, especially if you're just focused on academia or translation or anything that does not involve the tech industry. It can get really hard. And so I had to kind of pick that up really quickly. And so what's really helped me out a lot was finding a mentor. So I really encourage you guys, when you come into a new job, when you make that switch, find someone that can help you make things clear, that you can go with questions. I mean, there's people in when you come into a job like this that are part of teams that are just writing FAQs or guide. There's a lot of resources out there in your area. So I say find a mentor so that you feel like you have someone that's kind of helping you along until you're kind of out there on your own, because it really can feel like you're set to just kind of sink or swim in this industry. So that really helped me out. And if you're one of those people that has a lot of knowledge in how to work about the tech field already, you already know Python, you already know what to do with with Git or other things like that, I encourage you to really embrace being a mentor for somebody. So a little bit more about what I do. So a lot of what I work on is training, right? So training our language models, making sure that as we're reviewing usages from users out there, that any kind of error that I'm finding with the bugs that I'm reviewing, we can kind of remap them into what the correct intent of the user was. So, but I'm working with a lot of acoustic data. So I'm picking up on this, and then the words that were misrecognized, for example, maybe I can't think of one example. I should have had something ready for you guys. But whatever kind of misrecognition that sometimes, you're talking to your phone or computer and it just didn't understand, you said something and the screen is showing something else. Well, we look at that and we kind of try to find out what went wrong. And what could have gone wrong could be a number of things. Perhaps an assimilation process wasn't picked up, or the user spoke too quickly. So all of that is something that I'm looking at. And in times where the actual intent isn't being picked up, we're also creating artificial data. We're inputting a lot of stuff in there by pronunciations and all of these forms of data to make sure that the language model gets better at understanding what is actually being said. And I also work on curating lexicons, which means that I organize them. There's so many, and we're in different kinds of systems, and we're always trying to make sure that we're replacing old data, because what was popular a couple years ago, that's part of our lexicon, may no longer be as popular, and we need to lower that weight on that. So we're constantly doing a cleanup. And as a linguist, you're kind of just looking at old pronunciations or old data, and you're kind of doing new phonetic transcriptions to what is more relevant now. And lastly, what I really love to do is I love to conduct experiments to make sure that we can improve our language models. If there's something that is no longer relevant, but is still a part of our language model, for example, a phone, I work on trying to create an experiment where we can prove that we need something else instead, kind of a replacement. I can't kind of go into too much of that, but we do conduct experiments also. Can I see the next slide? And so here's how we apply linguistics day to day in my area. So a lot of what I do is we create phone maps and pronunciation guidelines, and these are the things that kind of help us and help the engineers write scripts. We work with engineers, and we're trying to export and streamline a lot of data and information at once. So if we create and provide phone maps or guidelines to them on how things need to be transcribed, they're able to better create these scripts that can kind of do the work of us, and linguists are just kind of brought in to just look and review and make sure that everything is correct, the pronunciations will work for our locale. I also review errors. Like I mentioned, I receive a lot of bugs and things that are not working well, and in different areas of ASR or TTS, I'm working on making sure that these things can be improved. We also work with text normalization sometimes, and we also have to review those kind of bugs. And I also organize the data by templates. I have my notes right here, one second. And that just means that whatever kind of categories or a group of data has, we're kind of filing it into different or archives and organizing it so that they can more easily be ready when a certain template, like a command to look for the weather, is brought up. So we work with that also in making them relevant to the users. And this was also mentioned earlier, as a linguist, we really work as like these as consultants on a number of issues and processes in NLP. For example, we have like really high standards, right? We really want our AI systems to work really well and for users to really like using them. It's kind of funny sometimes when friends of ours say things like, oh, why isn't this working right? What can you tell them to fix this? It's not understanding me. And so it's kind of rewarding when you know that there's been a bug out there and you've fixed it. So that's the really rewarding aspect of it. But yeah, it's difficult because like Justin mentioned earlier, you know, not everything can be fixed sometimes, and it's really difficult, you know, to have high standards and you get really attached to your efforts. But in the end, things are constantly changing and moving, and we're cleaning things up and then that might break something else. So you do as much as you can, and you apply the highest standards that you can with language. And in the end, we're always kind of at a point where like, is the technology there? Can we do this? And that's a little bit of what I do. But my advice to anyone out there who really wants to get into the tech industry is that don't be intimidated if you feel like, oh, I don't know enough Python, or could I apply? I don't have all of the requirements here and there. My advice is to apply, to really be aware of what your strengths are, right? So for me, it was translation, localization. So I really honed in on those skills to kind of negotiate my position and bring it to the table like, hey, you know, I may not, you know all of this in technology, but I am a really good linguist and a translator, and I feel like I would be an asset on your team because I can really find ambiguity in the data, in the errors. I can find a pattern easily. And so I really encourage you to not be intimidated, to go ahead and submit your application and really talk up your linguistics, and in the meanwhile kind of be hitting up Stack Overflow and as much as you can. It's a growing industry, and so I really welcome you all, and linguists are like the nicest people too, so everybody will be willing to like help you get there as you're kind of familiarizing yourself in the field. So I think that's all I have.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Good. So I'm Latanya, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about taking the leap toward software engineering, which is on the other side of the scale. You have my LinkedIn information over there, and feel free to reach out with any questions. And I'm going to start by talking to you a little bit about my background. So, as I said, I'm really on the other side of the scale. I was a hardcore linguist. I got my undergrad in Brazil in Portuguese and English. And then from there, I had a master's in Romance language, a PhD in Spanish linguistics. And I worked as a professor. I was Spanish linguistics assistant professor for 4 years at a liberal arts college here in the US. Then I moved back to Brazil, where I'm from. I was doing research in linguistics, in acoustic phonetics for 2 years. Then I joined the public university there, and I was an assistant professor there as well. So I was happily in love with linguistics, and I altogether, since I started grad school, which was in '98, I had almost 20 years of like teaching and like doing lots of research. And I think we had a really happily marriage. And then my husband found a job in San Francisco. He moved here, and I started like looking for things to do here. I was working in Berkeley at a research project at the time, remotely. And so I always used some sort of scripts to analyze my data in acoustic phonetics. I was able to read and quickly modify the scripts that some of my colleagues worked on previously. And when I started like being exposed to the tech world here in San Francisco, still living in Brazil, I found out that it would be a really good thing for me to learn how to better code on my own. The goal was really to get better at my research, being able to analyze my data alone and being more independent in that sense. So I started taking, first I took a Coursera free online course that's called Programming for Everyone. It's an excellent course. This professor from Michigan State, Charles Severance, he was really amazing in the sense that he demystified and he took away all my fears from computers. Like it was like when I put some wrong input and the computer didn't reply the way I wanted, I was thinking it was my problem and I didn't know how to do that. It turns out that he talked to me in the course, like he talks to all of us, the students, in a way that it gave me a lot of confidence in how I perceive my interaction as a human with computers, and it was a really interesting leap for me there. From there, is still working in Brazil. I came here to San Francisco for a few months, and then I took a part-time Python course in the evenings, a place called Hackbright Academy, which is a school for women, for women that want to learn how to code. They had a 2 evenings a week class. So I started taking that class. Again, I'm trying to think like, what could I do if I possibly move to San Francisco? There is this massive tech industry out here. And then I was like, well, I can always, all the knowledge that I apply into coding, it's all gonna come back to me, and I'm gonna be doing my research in a better way. So it was a very interesting step. I was not expecting what was about to happen. As soon as I started taking those classes, and I could like really notice how much in common like linguistics and coding had, like all the rules and patterns, and like I felt like, you know, I had to do this kind of detective work to understand what was going on in all the different like files, how the files get together, how one part fits with another one. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is amazing. I really like this. So a big part of, as you guys probably know, a big part of like being a professor is teaching. And I had a fairly heavy teaching load in my last job. So doing research was mainly something that I had to do on the side. I had like massive classes, and I easily every semester had over 100 students. So I spent a lot of my time grading and when I saw like that it could work with the rules, the patterns, and all the things that I really liked on research, I could do that full time. I was sold on it. The school that I went to, Hack Bright, to do this part-time program had a full-time program as a boot camp program. And so I decided to join that boot camp program and to become a software engineer. And that was about a little bit over a year ago. Last summer, I went to the Texas Advanced Computing Center to do an apprenticeship in software engineering. And now I'm at my first job in the tech industry. I started 5 months ago at Hack Bright as a customer success engineer. Can we have the next slide, please? So, David? Oh, yeah, thank you. So what do? As a customer success engineer, I am the first contact. Me and another person that works with me. We are a small company, and we have 2 engineers in that position. We talk to people firsthand. We filter all different things that happen and send it to different parts of the company. We answer questions about the products. We also answer questions about the software developer kits, which are in 9 different languages. We troubleshoot and fix bugs that affect customers. We query a database constantly, and we also read and write code like daily, fixing bugs or developing features. One example of a bug that I'm fixing today, I have we noticed that one of our customers could not pay his invoice because the invoice had a very, very low, it was 20-something cents, and Stripe does not allow them to pay that, but then our system is saying, oh, you have a debt with us. So I'm currently fixing that on the background. And again, it's a super amazing, rewarding job for me because I have to navigate this massive code base and I have to find all like different parts, how they fit together, and do this detective work that really excites me. I really like that. Can I have the next slide, please? So in my opinion, what do you need to get a job in tech? I agree with several things that other people said. Ability to read code is, I would say, is very helpful. I don't think it is a requisite to be able to write code to start on the industry, especially because not everybody wants to go extreme. Not everybody wants to go to software engineering. But if you were to learn that, I would say Python is definitely a great first language because, as far as I know, is one of the ones that is closer to human languages. So it's a really good start. I would say as well that even if you don't wanna become a software engineer, but you wanna be moving data around, because that's what a lot of people in this area, in the tech industry, works with. So I think having some knowledge of data structures and algorithms, like data structures are like lists, dictionaries, tuples. How do they work? How can I add data to this? How can I extract data to this? It's a very like superficial knowledge, but I think that will be very useful to be able to know a little bit about those things. And definitely some passion for patterns, rules, and excitement about solving puzzles and overcoming challenges, I would think would be great in any area related in tech and linguistics. But if you want to go towards software engineering, I would say even more. And finally, my next slide, I have 2 more things I want to tell you. Which are basically what I consider the challenges of the industry. It's definitely a fast-paced environment. It really requires you to take a lot of initiative, to have a go-getter attitude. And one of the things that was really hard for me was to feel comfortable with not knowing things. I was used to be, you know, this professor that goes in front of the classroom and answer all those questions. And all of a sudden, I'm this very vulnerable person that doesn't really know a lot about things in this new area. And it took me a while to adjust. And I feel like I'm fairly adjusted now, so I'm very happy. Advantages, you have a quicker gratification. I used to work on a paper for about a year and a half between collecting data, analyzing data, writing the paper, sending it to reviews, you know, 1 year and a half, 2 years to see your paper published. Now I can write a feature in one afternoon, and like I still get this thrill that I have something out there that I made and that is contributing to society. So it really like makes me happy. You have a lot of autonomy in this industry. I feel like in academia is a very old-fashioned in many ways. It has a lot of bureaucracy and structure, and so I feel like I have a lot more autonomy now in the tech industry. I can do a lot more things. I have a lot more flexibility. And I also have flexibility on time. I have some structure, some time that I'm expected to work, but I can work from home like I'm doing today, or I can easily like let them know that I'm not going to be available a few hours, and that's totally cool. And the industry also has like great perks and like that I would never imagine that I would have access to, because academia has a lot of restrictions and really good high paying. So that's kind of what I have for you, and feel free to ask more questions.
Okay, thank you everyone for speaking, and now we're going to have about 10 minutes of discussion between the panelists, so take it away.
Do you want us to come back on camera for this, David?
Yeah, you can all be on camera.
Okay. So I thought, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say that Justin Reel had an unexpected schedule conflict and had to leave, but anyone who had a question for him can feel free to contact him through LinkedIn.
Okay. So I thought that I would sort of kick things off if everyone is okay with that.
Sure.
Yeah, so there are lots of graduate students who are watching this, and I think most of them will probably want to do something in tech that's very closely related to, I mean, as a former PhD, as a PhD holder, former PhD student, if someone had said you could get a job in tech, I would think, oh, that's great. I want to do exactly what I did in my PhD. So I'm wondering if we can talk about how probable that is, if it's possible, that sort of a thing. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I would say you could like try to go into an area. Let's say, for example, my area of specialization is phonetics and phonology. So I definitely interviewed and tried like go into a specific area. However, I think if you really know that's what you want to do, I think you should go for it by all means, but that's going to restrict the options, right? If you are more open to other things that require linguistic knowledge, you're going to have more options. So that's one thing. The other thing is like I think you can choose an area. We have very specific niches of research in academia. So I would think that to think that you're doing exactly what you're doing on your PhD, that would be a little too far. I think that would make your life very difficult to find a job.
I would definitely agree with that. I think that it would be, you shouldn't expect that. On the other hand, as you said, like if there are things that you know is your passion and you know that will be the thing that you love doing, I would say things are changing enough that you should try to find a place where that they're at least open to that being in the future. Like when you're researching what to join, like, hey, is this something that you could conceivably draw a line to? And one of the skills that we need moving from academia into research, into production, into industry, is learning how to set shorter time bounds and measure progress in areas that either don't actually have good measures even in academia, or the measures that engineers and sort of a tech mindset will have won't fit the ways you thought about it before. So I think those skills translating, can you view the thing that you view as your topic in a broader light and from a different evaluative perspective.
I just wanted to add to that, that I know that sometimes you can use your PhD, like your research, I mean, to like leverage like what you've done, right? So I have friends that are working as linguists now that have done research in sociolinguistics and have done research in how, you know, the LGBT community uses language and all of, or how, you know, Native American are using like a specific language and just that kind of research. It kind of shows that you are familiar with one area and that you can conduct research and that you can do experiments and things like that. I think it's really good to like leverage that and to show that you are, you know, very versed and experienced in the field of linguistics, because ultimately you come into this area as like an expert in language and they really are interested in your insight. So they want to know your input of like, how do you think we're doing this? And you're going to be reviewing a lot of, you know, errors and things like that. So I think it's a really good leveraging tool.
Great point. Okay, one question, another question that I wanted to throw out to you guys is, I get contacted a lot with people asking about levels of coding proficiency. It sounds like we have varying levels of proficiency in machine learning and SQL and Python and things like that. Any advice there on like a coding interview, or should they expect a coding interview, that sort of a thing?
So I had no experience in coding at all, like nothing. I didn't know much about it. So I remember that I was told on my interview that I was going to have a coding Python regex interview. And I remember like the 2 nights before, I was like, what is regex? What is Python? What is happening? And I was like going online. But so when I went online, and thankfully I did go, but in the end, I actually didn't even have an interview with that. So I was really lucky in that respect, but I ended up getting the job, you know, obviously, and I've been learning so much up until that position in the month that I had before preparing, just like learning more about what regex is and Git and all of that. And it's not intimidating. Once you start, you're a linguist. That means that you're good at finding patterns. That means that you have already skills, that you're an analytical thinker. So do not get discouraged. This will come easy to you. Coding will be easier, I think. I don't know.
I would say that at least I learned the hard way that what it means to have technical proficiency for linguist roles, at least at Google, varies dramatically. And actually every team has, in a bigger organization, teams vary in whether the word linguist is just, oh, we needed a bucket to put all these other people who deal with text. You know, like actually many linguists at Google were actually ontologists or people who were data scientists, identified differently. So recently there's been a move to sort of clarify this, and sort of we distinguish in what we call analytical linguist, and there is also a computational linguist role. Those, of course, both are separate from, you know, research scientists who are actually computational linguists, or SWEs, software engineers who have done linguistic work. So I think that this is where I guess you need to have a good recruiter, and you need to ask a lot of questions, and you should just remember that if you have questions, other people do too. And it may be that this is the first time this may be a new role, for example. They may not have figured out what they need. And I think maybe it was Justin's point earlier that flexibility is a big part of being able to learn on the job. I think you should be able to demonstrate your ability to think clearly, to explain how you're thinking. I think people will be impressed, even if they know that you didn't come with a, you know, computer science or didn't do an engineering job. I think they understand that your expertise is somewhere else, and that if you can even speak the language a little bit and show critical thinking and analytical thinking, that's huge. That I think that's the important part.
Good advice. Okay.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
So I will say that in order to maintain yourself and your relevancy in your field, and to like be able to expand your scope in the area in the industry, you cannot not come encounter, like not be encountered, like not know Python, not know other, you can't just stay at the basis of knowledge. Like you will have to eventually, well, pretty quickly, I would say, pick it up. But what I'm saying is that don't let that be something that kind of prevents you. Just even if you think like, I barely know a little bit about it. Well, okay, well, you're growing on that knowledge. Obviously, every day you're growing on that knowledge. So kind of embrace that journey, and you've got your linguistic knowledge to also make you an expert in the area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for the interview part, there's something that Christopher said in the last webinar that I liked, and in my experience like that, it's good to think that way, is that you're actually not applying for a software developer position. So like, they know what you know, kind of, and they know what to expect from you, and just be open about what you know, be open about what you think you can learn, and you'll be good to go. And presumably if you're trying to get into the tech industry, you would like to learn more about this. So that's something that's good to share with your interviewer as well.
I think that really applies if you're interviewing for linguist positions. I had 2 jobs as a data scientist, and sometimes people think that means software engineer, and would get like very hard coding questions. Yeah, all sorts of wacky questions. So yeah.
Very.
Yeah. Okay, David, do you want to maybe open it up to attendee questions now?
Sure, yeah, we have come to the question and answer portion of the webinar. So again, there is a questions widget on your GoToWebinar dashboard, and feel free to type your questions in there and let us know if your question is for a specific panelist or panelists. So there is already a question there. And it's not for anyone specific. If I'm a linguistics major and I minor in computer science, will I be able to enter a career as a computational linguist?
Anyone want to take that?
Why not?
Yes.
It's not the degree. It's like, what did you learn and what do you like to do? You can, frankly, I know people who were like philosophy undergrads and now they're functioning linguists. Tech. I mean, it's really things that you can pick up on the job, or things change fast enough. So
I wanted to say something too, David, just really quickly. Don't discount the possibility that you might be able to get a job like Latanya and like myself, doing something that has very little to do with what your super specialized specialty was at some point in life. I mean, I work on a human computation team. We don't do anything with linguistics. Before this, I had 2 jobs as a data scientist doing mostly modeling, and it didn't have anything to do with linguistics. So it's pursuant to Nancy's point. I don't think it's necessarily the case that exactly what you studied, has to lead very directly to some certain career, some certain job. So yeah, I would agree with Nancy there. Why not?
Okay, next question, and I'll specify our panelists have agreed that we can run a few minutes over, so we'll plan on running maybe 5 or 10 minutes long. Next question here, again, not for anyone specific. Is there exciting language work being done by startups, or is it mostly in established companies? How would people find opportunities from non-established groups?
Well, I mentioned that I'll start this one for you guys if you want. I mentioned that I worked at a startup. As a data scientist before this, and I was actually at a startup, the job immediately I had before becoming an analytical linguist at Google. And it was doing 2 things, time series modeling and also natural language generation. And so they were doing, interesting things with language at a startup. So I would say that that's definitely possible. Also, I think Siri started as a startup, a smaller company. It was acquired by Apple.
I was going to say, I have a friend who actually was working with us, was also a computational linguist, and left to work at a startup. They were working on, I think, on syntax or something in NL. But yeah, there's definitely startups out there, and I think they're great because you learn so much, and you're like I think Justin said, you wear a lot of different hats, and your scope gets a lot bigger, and you're needed. So, but I know that they're out there. I don't know much about it. I work with Apple, so it's pretty already like established what our roles are here.
I work at a startup, but it's my current position is far from linguistics. I think they kind of like use more my background as proof that I have people skills and I have analytical skills. And then my position is transitional. I'm not currently a software engineer yet. I'm learning on the job. So I know as well that there are startups out there that have positions targeted specifically for linguists, but there's a lot of positions in customer support and things like that, that if you want to get into the tech industry, that's one way to get there, and that they would consider your background. But then again, it depends on your specific goal.
Okay, and there's actually two separate but related questions. One of them is, do you need to be in California to work in this sector? And the other is, for the group, what resources can you suggest for linguists to find computational paths / careers not on the coast?
I mean, a lot of jobs are in California. We've got the whole Silicon Valley area, but there's also Austin, New York, Boston. Those are really big cities where things are happening in tech, and there's a lot of companies out there. I mean, especially if you're looking to get a job with a big company like Google, Apple, Facebook, all these, or even a smaller tech company, all these companies have headquarters or offices all over the world, and they need linguists all over the world. And as a lot of our jobs can be done remotely as well. So you don't necessarily have to be in California. That's another thing that I think you can also negotiate when you're getting a position, perhaps. But there are a lot of jobs in California.
Also, there are a lot of learning opportunities here. I'm actually in LA now, but I was in San Francisco like 2 months ago. So like a lot of meetups you can go to, a lot of just talks, and just people that you might be able to know. It's just the concentration is bigger because it's Silicon Valley, and it's, you know, where all the tech companies are. So that's a plus, but yeah, it's not the only way. I'm working remotely right now, which is great. That's an option for a lot of people. Our team is an international team, so we can't like bring everybody to California, right? So a lot of them just work from their respective countries of origin, and it works. And people are open, companies are open to do that.
Okay, next question here. Thank you, guys. Some of you guys mentioned how important Python is. Is R actually going obsolete?
I doubt it. I mean, we're just moving in fully to Python 3 because Python 2 is gonna stop. I was at PyCon 4 weeks ago, and the community is massive. They are constantly like building new things. I really doubt it. But that's my perspective on it. I don't know if anybody else has another opinion.
Yeah, I will weigh in here because we talk about this on my team a lot. We do a lot of mixed effects modeling, which tends to be more sort of prevalent in R. Not that it doesn't exist in Python, but so it's kind of a constant subject of conversation. And I think that R's strength is also its weakness. Our strength is that, you know, a lot of statisticians develop in R, which is also a weakness because it means that the support is not as robust, that, you know, things aren't necessarily tested as well, that they're not optimized. So I think that I wouldn't say R is going away by any stretch of the imagination. The other thing too I would say is people, I think, make too big of a difference between R and Python. Like, they're not radically different. I write R and Python, you know, a lot, and it's not that much different. So it's not the case that if you learn R, that Python is completely inscrutable.
The other thing I would like to add is like, Python might be, as I said, a great first language, but what you really learn is not, you know, the syntax of the language doesn't really matter much. What you learn is kind of like you learn the logic of like how to put pieces together and how to talk to computers. So it's like, that's what is really worth it. And then if you have a first language that makes it easier for you, moving on from that first language to R or to any other, even like JavaScript, which is so different, it's a lot easier. I think Nancy has to leave. She's
Sorry, bye everyone.
Bye.
Because they send me questions if you like. Bye.
Thank you, Nancy. And then
Okay, the next question. Outside of programming and coding, tech is being used in many aspects of linguistic research. Corpus methods are used widely, for example. Are corpus methods being used in industry, and in what way?
The Apple folks want to weigh in here. I think you guys probably work with Corpora a lot.
We work with a large amounts of data. I would say, Jose and I, what would you say, Jose? Yeah, we do. We do work with a lot of it, and we do use extracting methods by like using scripts and stuff of it. Would you be able to read the question one more time, David? David?
Sorry, just 1 second. Let me. It disappeared off my screen. I'm going to have to. Hang on.
What I was thinking is it kind of depends on what you consider corpus. It can be many things, but if you just consider it like as a, let's say, as a database of language, annotated language objects or something like that, we definitely work with that. Depending on the team, it's gonna look, one way or the other. We both work in the phonetics team, so we deal with phonetic information, so it's kind of a corpus of phonetic information. If you're in the semantics team, it's gonna look different, but yeah, definitely it's one of the most applicable things that you might learn in academia towards industry. Yeah, this kind of the structure and the way how to think about it is pretty similar.
Yeah, the question was about corpus methods, and are they being used in tech, and in what way?
Well, I would say that we are using a large amounts of corpus, but at the point that I'm using it at, it's already kind of been extracted and put into different categories that we then kind of work on and review. I wouldn't say that I get to use look at it a lot, at least from my perspective. But I'm like, as Jose mentioned, I'm sure it's being used in other teams. We get curated the data that we use. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm sorry.
I hear similar questions a lot from students, and it's kind of it always sort of looks like something like why do I need to know SQL? And I guess if you've only ever worked in data that can fit on spreadsheets, you might not understand why you need SQL. But pursuant to the topic of corpora, at some point the data gets so big that you can't really go through it in a spreadsheet, and that's when corpus methods, things like knowing some SQL and some something about regular expressions in Python, how to script things. So I would definitely say it's very useful.
Yes.
Okay. Next question, are there summer internship positions available for undergraduate students who wish to test the waters of tech linguistics?
Yeah,
I some, right?
There are. I know that Apple and Google, they all have their summer. IBM has like an internship program as well, which I think are great. The sooner you can get onto those in your undergrad, the better. Also, you're gonna already familiarize, make great connections and network. So there's definitely opportunities for internships, and I think that coming in as an intern first kind of already gives you a foundation. I think that if not, you might. A lot of the linguists, and I wanted to say this, in the field right now are contractors. And I'm a contractor. So I think that having an internship, you've already had an in with a company, you've already made solid connections there. So you can probably, hopefully get a more full-time direct position with a company like Google and IBM by having that internship background, than coming into a transitional role from, for myself being a translator before, and then now, being a contractor and kind of now doing my working my way into a more direct role.
Yeah, I have an intern that started this week. So yes, we definitely have interns.
Well, here's another question. Do older linguistics degrees look outdated to recruiters in the tech world?
I don't think so. I think that if you can back up your having that linguistic knowledge, but then also having like experience in the industry with, let's say your resume looks like, well, I got my degree in linguistics, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that, but I've done this in language, I've presented, or I have experience in coding or anything like that, or you've done kind of, you can, your resume looks like one that you can easily point to stuff where language has always been in your background and your experience. You can kind of see how language, you're always touching on it. You've always been touching on it. I think that ultimately you're being hired as a linguist, and that's what's important.
I would add to that like nowadays, degrees for anything, like, even the other side of the scale, like software engineer, I mean, it counts a lot less than your knowledge itself. So if you are able to like have a good conversation, have a good interview on the topic, that's really what's gonna get you hired. Will an outdated degree maybe not let you get a phone call? Maybe yes. One trick that I read was, if you have graduated a long time ago, maybe don't put dates on your resume. Make sure that you get the phone call, and then with the phone call you can show your knowledge. But I totally agree with Kenya.
Okay, another question here. It seems really difficult to get an interview at a given team/company unless you already know someone there. Any tips on how to get noticed?
Yeah, that's a good point. It is definitely easier if you know somebody. That's why when I was talking before, that's one of the things I recommend, just network with people, even if it's online. If you don't live in one of these big cities, you can always like make friends with people on LinkedIn, or go to a meetup, or create a meetup. It's a great way to get to know people. So that's definitely a plus. And also do things like post your profile in job listing sites. Have your update information on LinkedIn and all that kind of thing that might help you to get noticed by screeners, by recruiters. I don't know if anybody else have other tips.
I was going to say, don't be afraid to reach out to a recruiter if you're interested in a job, because I have a friend. I always refer to my friends. I have a friend who wanted to work as a computational linguist. So in their undergrad, they reached out to a recruiter and mentioned, let me know when there's an opening. I'm getting my degree, and then constantly was like, hey, I'm almost done with my degree, and I'm done. And then sure enough, he's so young, and we were all like blown away. He's like 20 or 21, and he is working as a computational linguist, and he only has his BA. But I mean, persistence counts. And if you have a great attitude, don't be afraid to reach out to a recruiter directly if you don't know anybody. And if you do know somebody, then tell your friends, like, hey, talk to your recruiter for me.
Definitely. And also like be okay with like not getting responses for a lot of the things that you're putting out there. It's gonna happen. You're gonna like apply a lot, and maybe you're gonna get 10%, 20% responses from people, and that's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. That happens to everyone. So keep that in mind.
Also, there's no need to necessarily work at a big company all the time. I mean, there's nothing wrong with starting out working for smaller companies. If anything else, if nothing else, it will get you noticed by the big company. So there's no problem working for a small company at all.
Absolutely.
Good. Then a couple of questions have asked about what sites can people go to look for jobs in tech.
I would say Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Indeed. I don't know, but yeah, there's definitely LinkedIn. You mentioned Dice, Jose, but
Yeah, I think that one's only for tech positions. There's another one that is only for entry level position. I think it's called Way Up or something like that. If you're just starting, after your program.
If you're interested in startups, there's a site called Angel List that I think is for only startups. Also about the question of, do you have to be in a big city? There's a lot of startups that are not in Silicon Valley or New York. And so maybe that's a good way to start out.
I also wanted to add, for a lot of linguists in the field, there's a lot of articles on this already. A lot of positions are contractor positions, and they can be, it's hard, and it's also, I think, a good opportunity. If you're new and you're learning and you want to just get your foot in the door, don't get discouraged because you think, oh, it's a contractor position. I don't want to, I want to get a direct role. Don't get discouraged, because the contract positions can last for a long time. There's a lot good perks. You can definitely negotiate a good salary. Know your worth. Go on Glassdoor, find out what the market rate is for the position that you're applying to, and be confident, because you are an asset and you're definitely needed in the field. So they need you, just as much as you need them, but they need you. So don't get discouraged. And if you are a contractor and you're looking for a more direct position, I would say that, like Chris mentioned, maybe a smaller company, or even banks need linguists because they're developing new tools and virtual assistants. Schools need linguists if they're developing any software that's going to have to have a conversational assistant. So everybody is using a conversational assistant, so everybody needs a linguist.
Okay, and I think we have time for perhaps one more question before we wrap up. I'm not interested in full-time work. What about part-time and working on temporary projects?
That's also available. I know temporary positions, especially for contractors, I know that they exist. Part-time, though, I'm not sure.
I don't know about part-time. I haven't heard of part-time. I've heard of temporary and like a short contract. The shortest I think I've heard is maybe 3 months, but not part-time. But they have really flexible hours, so maybe.
This maybe is a good time to talk about at the very end that it is a relatively tight market. So part-time is a luxury. For instance, for Google, throws all sorts of recruiting resources at software engineers, because there's, they have a lot of openings for software engineers. There are 100-something linguists at all of Google. I mean, they're not that many positions. So I agree with Kenya that you can be, to some extent, that you have some power and that they need linguists. But on the other hand, there are a lot of linguists applying for the, 3 or 4 or 5 positions. So part-time is maybe a luxury that it's going to be difficult to find in these sorts of jobs. I would also like to work part-time. Not an option.
Yeah, put me there too.
Okay, is there anything else any of you would like to say before we conclude?
I don't think so. I mean, just go ahead, have confidence. I hope that this webinar has helped you. I feel like I was really drawn to talk, and because I took advantage of a lot of the information that was shared in prior webinars. So learn the language, get your foot into Python, and really don't stop reading. Keep reading articles on what's going on neural networks. Keep reading articles on NLP process. Keep reading, because I mean, you got to keep up with what's going on in the field.
And reach out, as Jose said, reach out to people, reach out to us, reach out to other people. If you are not physically somewhere, definitely do not underestimate networking over the web. It works.
Yeah, like Kenya said, linguists are very nice in general, so we'll be happy to talk to you.
Yeah, I would just say thank you to everybody that participated. It's very, very kind of you.
Thanks for coming. Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for a big thank you to all our panelists, and especially to Chris for organizing the webinar. Thanks to you for participating, and thanks to all of you in the audience for attending. Again, we'll have a recording of this webinar available on Monday. We'll put it on our YouTube channel, and I will send everyone an email with directions for how to find it. So have a great weekend, everyone, and thanks again.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye now.